Welcome everybody. This is the session Laptop University, the Future of HE. And essentially what we're going to be exploring today with our panel is whether new forms of technology within universities, specifically MOOCs, which are massively open online courses, represent a threat or an opportunity or merely a tool for universities and academics. I'll be your chair this afternoon. I'm Toby Marshall. I'm an A-level teacher, has some involvement in higher education as well, and a member of the Institute of Ideas Education Forum. And I've been following the discussion of education and technology for some years, so I was very interested and pleased when I was invited to chair this session. I'll just say a little bit about the format of the discussion first, and then introduce my speakers in the order in which they're going to speak. Each of our speakers are going to introduce for between 5 and 7 minutes, and I'm going to be rude and abusive if they go past 7 minutes, because the key thing for me today is I want to open this one up to the floor as quickly as possible. So after people have introduced, we may have a short panel discussion, but I'm keen as quickly as possible to go out to the floor in order that we can open this up for points and discussion and questions. And I'll take people in batches and then bring the panel back in, and if we're doing well, we'll hopefully get to 2 or 3 rounds of questions and points. After that, I'll ask the speakers to sum up for 1 minute in reverse order. So, I'm not going to say a huge amount about the speakers, so do feel free to embellish this very short biography I'm about to offer if there's particular things you want to add. But speaking first, on my far right is Matt Walton, Head of Product at Futurelearn, which is an organisation which is intimately involved in the development of MOOCs across a whole body of universities in this country, and I'm sure he's going to tell us a lot more about the things that he's been involved in. Speaking after Matt, to my immediate right, is Jason Walsh, who is the Ireland correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. And Jason writes on a whole range of social issues, including the internet and rights and internet culture. So I'm sure he's going to bring a distinct perspective to our discussion today. On my far left is Diana Laurillard. She's Professor of Learning with Digital Technologies and an Assistant Director for the Open Mode Learning at the Institute of Education. Anyone who's been following this ongoing debate in England about the relationship between IT education at primary, secondary, tertiary, higher levels, knows that Diana has been a key figure in that discussion for many years. And then speaking last, to my immediate left, is Professor Dennis Hayes, a Professor of Education at the University of Derby, Director of the Academics for Academic Freedom, and co-founder of the East Midlands Salon. I'm not sure that we entirely know whether we're all going to agree or whether we're all going to disagree. We may have a big fight. I'm going to try and stimulate that if I can. But it may be shades of opinion within one perspective on education, universities and technology, but we'll see. So Matt, if you could start us off.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Excellent. So I'm Matt Walton. I am Head of Product for Futurelearn, which is the first UK-led MOOC platform. Who in this room has done a MOOC before? Hands up.
Do you mean completed?
Well, oh, it started already. So a MOOC, for those of you who don't know, is a massive open online course, and it's a movement that started in the US a number of years ago, and we are building on that tradition in that we are providing short courses online for free, where a large number of people can learn together. And we're working with some top quality higher education institutions in order to do that. Futurelearn is an independent company that's wholly owned by the Open University, so we're building on the 40 years of distance learning expertise that the OU brings, and we're combining that with the fast moving culture of a digital startup. It's a partnership, so we have 26 universities involved. There's 23 from the UK, including people like Reading, Leeds, Southampton, Bristol, to name but a few. We've also just added 3 international partners to the partnership, so Monash from Australia, Auckland from New Zealand, and Trinity College Dublin from Ireland. There's also content partners we've got involved. So the British Library, the British Council and the British Museum are opening up their archives to enrich courses with their artefacts. We launched in beta 3 weeks ago, and we started running our first course this Monday gone, which was a course on the secret power of branding from the University of East Anglia. And there's a wide range of courses that are going to be happening over the next few weeks. So there's things like begin programming a mobile game, there's something called The Mind is Flat, which is about making decisions, and there's the England of Richard III, so there's a whole range of diverse things that are going to be on offer. It's a new platform that we've built from the ground up, and we built it from scratch because we wanted to rethink how people learn online, and importantly, in large numbers. We want to bring the power of the social web to learning, so it is a social learning platform. And the expertise we bring comes from the OU and academia, but also comes from people like myself and our CEO, Simon Nelson, whose background is the BBC and not traditional education. Plus there's people who've been involved in Skype, ITV and gov.uk, the recently relaunched government website. So our vision for Futurelearn is to inspire learning for life through telling stories, provoking conversation, and celebrating progress. Those are our kind of key pillars. I'll just quickly talk a little bit about those. So learning for life hints at lifelong learning, it hints at convenience and being able to fit it around your life. And it's also about enriching life and also making it useful, so potentially in your career. The storytelling part is about narrative, and narrative is very important to us. MOOCs are an event, they're something that happens at a certain time, and that's what makes them quite interesting. They're a journey, there's a beginning, a middle and an end to them. And the interesting thing about the MOOC user experience is that it's not simply on demand, because if you can do it on demand, then you could, and you can do it tomorrow, then you may never do it. So, but if you have to do it by Sunday, then suddenly you're much more likely to. Storytelling is also about communicating ideas through video, audio, text, pictures and other interactivity that we're building. Social learning is at the heart of what we do, because the best way of learning is by talking about things, and by explaining ideas to other people, you start to own them yourselves. And it's also really important in the world of distance learning to provide that kind of support. Celebrating progress is about breaking things into small steps and making the learning visible and motivating people by giving them that sense of progress. So, while I think that MOOCs are certainly a disruptive technology, I think actually they're a new and complementary way to access education. They should open educational opportunities up to people who in the past may have found it too expensive, too intimidating, and possibly too inconvenient. We're not in a world where a 3-year degree is all the training that you need to do for a job for life. We're in a world where people need to learn new skills, often alongside a full-time job. It's also, I think, about the people who aren't learning at the moment, or not doing so in vast numbers. And it's about leisure learning. So I'd love to create a product where people can decide to spend an hour on Futurelearn rather than watching the next episode of Breaking Bad and then maybe the following day check up to see if someone's replied to them in a conversation rather than logging into Facebook. I think we can provide that bridge between that informal education and towards a world of more formal education. And I'd like to kind of finish by picking an example from my previous career, which is that 10 years ago the BBC launched a podcasting service, and there was a lot of radio producers who were a bit worried about podcasting and whether it would mean that people would listen to less radio. Shortly after the podcasting service launched, there was some research done to see if this was actually the case. And what was found was that people listened to more radio because it made them more loyal, it made it more convenient, and it deepened their passion for the medium. I think the same could be true of MOOCs, and that if people have the opportunity to start learning, it may inspire them, it may rekindle a love for learning, and it hopefully will... Sorry, I've screwed the end up of this speech.
Don't worry, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Just continue.
It will rekindle a love for learning. There we go.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Jason.
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Institute of Ideas for having me. As you'll know, I'm not in the programme, I'm replacing someone else, but at least this means that I can finally get an answer to the question posed in Mean Streets by Harley Keitel, what's a MOOC? Hello, my name is Jason Walsh. I'm the Ireland correspondent of the Christian Science Monitor newspaper in Boston, and why I'm mentioning this will become clear presently. More obviously pertinent to this discussion, I'm also a PhD student, and I am currently attempting to create a meaningful epistemology of news. I don't know if this microphone's on, can you?
Yeah. Okay, fine.
So universities are arguably the second oldest still extant institution in the world, dating back to the high medieval period, further if you include cathedral schools that predated them. But the fact that they existed heretofore is no guarantee that they will continue existing tomorrow, nor is it any guarantee that they have a right to exist. But I'm here to argue that there is something unique about the university, something worth preserving. Now, I was discussing this last night, and someone brought up an interesting essay by Evgeny Morozov. Now, if you know Morozov, he's a technology scholar, and he wrote an excellent essay in The Baffler about publisher Tim O'Reilly. Incidentally, Morozov is a man without a PhD and works outside of the confines of a traditional university, but he wrote, "The brightest minds of Silicon Valley are disrupting whatever industry is too crippled to fend off their advances." Now, as a journalist, I obviously know exactly what he means. The brave warriors of disruption seem keenest on disrupting industries that are already on their knees. But is this also what MOOCs are about? Are they just kicking in an open door of the already failing institution of the university? Now, ironically, given what I'm about to argue, I attend University College Dublin. Again, why I'm telling you this will become clear. Education is what you make of it, and I've argued in the past, and I'm sure no one on the panel will agree with me, that you will get a better education reading a daily newspaper than doing many undergraduate degrees. The problem with this is, most people don't actually read a newspaper, they just graze it. But the reason I make this claim is that I think knowing about the world as it is of the highest importance. The educational dimension isn't necessarily in the information that's imparted to you, which may or may not be accurate after all. It's about what you do with that information, how you discuss it, and with whom you discuss it. If this sounds suspiciously like John Henry Newman's idea of the university as a community of scholars, that's because that's exactly what I'm arguing. Now, as you will know, assuming you read a newspaper, Ireland is currently in the midst of a crushing recession, and a common refrain throughout from politicians and pundits has been that Ireland's universities are not doing enough to prepare young people for the world of work. The basic claim being that university graduates are not fit for the labour force. That is as may be, but I don't remember vocationalism being the ne plus ultra of education, and it seems to me that many MOOCs are geared up more for certification than education. I admit it would be dishonest to pretend that this is not what universities are doing today as well. There's nothing wrong with MOOCs. I had a glance at some over the weekend, and I saw one on medieval ecclesiastical church architecture in England, which is something that I have no connection to, but I would find quite an interesting thing to study. Why would I want to study it? The same reason I might watch a documentary about it on BBC4. But is an online community of certificate seekers the same as a scholarly community, as a college, or is it another step down the road of the instrumentalization of education? If MOOCs expand knowledge, this is a good thing. If they expand certification, this is also a good thing. But if they were ever to replace universities as the primary locus of tertiary education, I believe it would be a bad thing, and it would be entirely the fault of those who run universities today. University College Dublin, now Ireland's largest university, was founded by John Henry Newman. It's absolutely massive, and it's a fine institution with a world-class reputation, but it is quite clearly to me, I go in every day, a factory for training the new workers of Ireland. Between this instrumentalisation, the crippling and absurd learning outcome targets set for faculty, and stifling political orthodoxies present, particularly in the liberal arts, Western universities appear to me to be in a sorry state. So unless one understands the universal in university to mean that everyone should go, it seems to me that we've moved very far away from the idea of the universitas, understanding the whole. I think today we need not MOOCs but a new Newman, more attuned to our secular age but no less committed to independent scholarship for its own sake, committed, as Newman put it, to knowledge as its own end. A habit of mind is formed which lasts through life, of which the attributes are freedom, equitableness, calmness, moderation and wisdom. That we're unlikely to see a figure emerging from today's universities is sad, but I think it would be mad to expect it from the MOOCs.
Lovely, thank you very much. Diana.
Well, I thought a reasonable way of tackling this really enormous subject would be to look at some of the statements in the outline for this event and just riff on those for a bit. So one of the first questions is about this revolution for the university today, so-called, which has been underway for a good number of years. Well, yes, that's true. The revolution has been going on despite the fact that governments and university leaders have not really supported it, not invested in it, not commanded it to happen, not supported it in any way. And really, the revolution that has happened in universities with the embrace of new technologies, and remember, this is new technologies which keep changing every week, pretty much. So it's a tough job to try and embrace them, but nonetheless, universities have. But that's happened on the backs of mainly of academics who are enthusiastic, committed to trying to make the best of their teaching. So they are looking at changing the quality and reach of their teaching, and obviously technologies of all of these different kinds have the means to help us do that. So one of the things I might return to more than once is that innovative teachers in all sectors have no time, no training, no support, essentially, for innovation with learning technology. Government expenditure on technology has been pretty substantial. In many schools, colleges and universities, we do have a lot of technology. But it's the spending on human capital, the ability to innovate, which I'm really talking about when I say we've had extremely little investment in this extraordinary revolution, which is happening around us. So when that statement says we're increasingly, universities are making lectures available online, well, yes, that's true. And this is despite the universal view that lectures are not everything to do with education, and a lot of people don't learn terribly well from education. And of course, while new technologies were trying to make their way, and everybody was saying, you know, we've got social media and we've got online learning and so on, and the lecture is dead, then they were thought to be out. Now they seem to have got a new lease of life with the advent of MOOCs, and not only lectures, but talking heads. So we're right back to the acknowledgement of the value of articulating the knowledge and the findings of a particular research, of a particular discipline, which is good. But then we have to remember that actually students do not learn just from lectures, and students, especially those who are struggling to become mature, capable individuals in the field, to reach a certain level of intellectual knowledge and skill, need nurturing and guidance. They are still learning how to learn, so they don't learn well just from lectures, or just from books, or just from any one thing. And they need that opportunity to be guided by the teacher who knows what they're trying to take the student towards. So we have, in educational institutions, in formal education, we have a kind of contract with the student to take them somewhere they can't know, because they haven't studied it yet. It's a journey. It's a journey that needs guidance and curating and nurturing. So that's a very important part of it. And to be able to get them to do that, then we have to be supporting them in that process. So free online lectures are great. I mean, they're this century's answer to the big idea in the 20th century of free public libraries, where you could go and anyone could get access to books. Well, now anyone can get access to great lectures. That's good. But it's not an education, any more than a public library was an education. Then there's the point about students can pick and mix. Well, students pretty much pick and mix already, certainly in higher education. And we have modularized our courses. But what we do is we say, well, there's a few core modules, and then there's this pathway to this kind of degree, and this kind of capability, and this pathway to this kind of capability. And that also needs curation. It needs people who care about the students getting to a particular endpoint in their journey. So it's not something where we can expect a novice learner to be able to pick their pathway through all the great universities of the world and what they happen to be offering. It's not necessarily a coherent form of learning that they're getting out of that. It is picking and mixing, and that's fine, but it's not an education in quite the same way. And then students will read fewer real books. Well, that's an interesting claim, an interesting worry. I don't think it's a Luddite point at all. But it's interesting that with the advent of e-books and online learning and online capability generally, that the sale of books has been rocketing up. Not as fast as e-books, e-books are coming on fast, but e-books still only count for something like just over 20% of the total market, which means that the majority of the book market is still print books, so they're doing fine. I don't think we really need to worry about them. And then the other point, everyone can have access to the very best in education. Well, no, they can't. The very best is necessarily an elitist idea. It's a selective idea. So, of course, we can't do that. And making higher education available to the currently something like 100 million people worldwide who currently need it, and the developing and emerging economies are creating that demand year by year, so that by 2025 it will be double that. Well, currently, our model for higher education is about a 1 to 25 staff-student support ratio. If you want to get that student understanding something, really understanding something, then that's about what we do, and MOOCs haven't changed that. MOOCs start out with your hundreds of thousands, yes, but they tail off very, very fast, and you end up with maybe 400 or 500 students in a MOOC who actually complete it. And who's doing it? It's people like us. It's professionals with several degrees. 70%, roughly speaking, of those universities which have run MOOCs and have reported on what they're doing, those are the people that they're serving. Well, why, with all the problems in education, are we delivering free courses to well-paid professionals with many degrees when our students on campus are paying £9,000 a year? This is strange. So I think the most important thing for us to do is to be able to figure out what can we do with new technology. How do we rise up to this challenge of how do we serve those 100 million people who want education without it being a 1 to 25 ratio. Now, technology is great at solving these difficult problems, but that's the challenge we should be setting ourselves, I think.
Lovely, thank you very much. Dennis.
Well, my interest in MOOCs started on March the 1st this year when I was on the East Midlands train to Derby, and they gave me a free copy of the Financial Times. And I nearly choked on my croissant when I read this headline, which was "Academic Freedom Goes Global." And I thought, our time has come. But that's academics for academic freedom. It hasn't, of course, because this is to reinforce some of the things that Diana said. MBAs online, very successful. Only 2% of people who take MOOCs actually get through in the end, so it's pretty low. There's lots of problems, but I didn't really want to talk about MOOCs too much. Although you have to be warned, the term was coined I think in 2008, and Stephen Haggard has just done a report for Biz called The Maturing of the MOOC. And he says this, and if you're working in a university, you might be afraid, I think. When we reflect with hindsight, 5 years from now, I think we will see the speed and energy of the MOOC movement as the force that swept away the old higher education world of campuses, lectures, attendance and assignment marking. I'm quite happy about the assignment marking, actually. But I'm going to put an argument, and you can agree with it, maybe some of the things that Jason said. But the rise of educational technology in all sectors parallels the decline of education. That's my argument. That what's gone on is a decline of education. And I think the celebration of technology in education is not progressive at all. It's a symptom of the decline of this whole social project of educating. What Oakeshott called the conversation between the generations has ended. And politicians, policymakers and academics who are celebrating a learning age in which access to information has not just been confused with knowledge and understanding, but it's led to the pronouncement that knowledge and understanding are redundant. Let me just give you a quote. I got this from Forbes. You hear this stuff all the time. This is from Harvard Innovation Fellow Tony Wagner. Today, knowledge is ubiquitous, constantly changing, growing exponentially. Today, knowledge is free. It is like air. It's like water. It's become a commodity. There's no competitive advantage today in knowing more than the person next to you. The world doesn't care what you know. What the world cares about is what you can do with what you know. You hear those things all the time, that we're living in a different sort of age. And of course, the claim is that universities are now redundant. because you've got your iPhone, that's all you need, access to information. And I've just got some pointers to what has actually changed. And there's two things that have happened, there are several things that have happened. The first is that we've lost the concept of powerful knowledge, the sort of knowledge that Danny was talking about that can really give you knowledge of understanding of the world. And people celebrate lifelong learning and everyday knowledge. You get it in a lot of literature in universities. We've lost the distinction between blue skies and applied research. And every university in Britain is at the moment telling lies about impact. Every university is writing this statement. What was your approach to impact between 2008 and to 2013? Well, there was none, right? Well, there was in my case, actually. That's a different story, I'll tell you later. But there was no impact. So, Blue Skies research, actually, the IPPR did a really good report that shows it's Blue Skies research that actually does most to change the world. That's when you're doing Blue Skies research. But some things that are even worse, and Jason just touched on this, there's been a shift from content to process. The idea that knowledge has just become information is a shift from content to process, and from knowledge to learning. We talk about learning all the time, whether it's learning objectives. And the thing about learning objectives is they transform the whole of higher education into a training scheme. If you've got objectives, that's training. Right? Education has no objectives. It used to be a very elementary distinction in philosophy of education. But we've gone along with it. Academics should be ashamed that they've gone along with sport for learning objectives. I fight constantly and with no effect whatsoever to try and get rid of learning. Because they don't just affect the students who go around those telephone directories, they affect your thinking because you mark. Use your marking criteria to match the learning objectives. So that's a training program. So there's very little you can say about MOOCs. If MOOCs, as Jason says, are going to just become processes of getting that qualification that you get in university, then you may as well have a MOOC. One of our students who's from Birmingham said, well, what's the point of going into university if we've got the slides are on the intranet, the notes are there. I go in and the lecturer reads out the slides. I may as well stay at home. That, you can see people taking that sort of move. But I do think the real issue is that we've lost the meaning of education. It's not just that we've celebrated knowledge and the learning age, we've lost the meaning of what education is. That's a profound problem. And ironically, I think, MOOCs bring the idea of what education could be back again. Diana mentioned the point about talking heads. People hate the talking heads, but I like the talking heads. Simply because they remind us that there were things called lectures that people did to give content. And they get criticisms of MOOCs from some of the feminist groups who they've created things called docs, just to confuse you, which are distributed, open, collaborative courses where there's no authority, no talking heads, and everything is sorted out democratically. And that's the sort of thing you get in universities. There is that sort of approach. We don't need knowledge. We just sit around and have what is often called a Socratic dialogue, which is actually therapeutic talk to one another. Sit around talking about something you know nothing about, basically, but it's all very entertaining for the students. I mean, edutainment, whether it's electronic or it's in that form of teaching, is wasting students' time. But the other criticism people make is they won't bring the student experience back. The student experience is a reification of, it used to be individual students just went to university, now they have something called the student experience. There are student experience officers. It's sort of mixture of paternalism and therapy, making sure that you're eating the right food that goes on in every single university. But if that's going to be destroyed by MOOCs, I'm in favour of MOOCs. For the bringing back talking heads, getting rid of therapy in the classroom, and getting rid of the student experience, then you'd be in favour of MOOCs. But what MOOCs can't do, and it's recently at a conference said they can't give you back the thing that I've often mentioned that Socrates actually taught. Now Socrates, of course, as you know, never wrote anything down. So it's all downhill from 399 BC. That's basically my position on universities. But then, to my surprise, celebrators of educational technology like Socrates, or a version of Socrates, because obviously if we didn't write anything down, then there must be other ways of communicating, so we can use pictures, or we can do all sorts of things, exciting things, rather than deal with words. Now, if you think being caught in the agora with Socrates, where he subjected you to the elenchus and the aporia, was a friendly therapeutic experience, you're wrong. It was not an experience, it was really to show that you knew nothing. But as I think Alan Bloom makes this point, that it took Socrates a lifetime of hard thinking and philosophizing to realise he knew nothing. Every 18-year-old student today knows they know nothing and don't need to know anything. That's the crisis of universities. But how do you change it? And my simple point is we should adapt a new principle for universities, which is this. We often talk about knowledge in universities being there for the students. Well, my new mantra for this, such a thing as a mantra, is the students are there for knowledge. Knowledge is not there for the students are there for knowledge.
Excellent, thank you, Dennis. Can we thank our speakers? No panel discussion, because I want to get out the floor. I'll just very briefly summarise some of the key phrases and ideas that came up for your benefit. Matt talked about MOOCs as a movement, which I thought was interesting, and the power of the social web. He talked about it as MOOCs as a disruptive but complementary technology. Jason, very interesting, I've been looking at Newman myself recently, talked about the need for a new Newman for our times and whether MOOCs are kicking out an open door, an institution that's already in decline. Diana made the point that innovative teachers don't have time for innovation and that maybe our priorities in terms of the allocation of resources are misguided. I like the idea that she talked about the need for curation and that there's no substitute for human interaction. And Dennis suggested that the rise of MOOCs parallels the decline of education and that there's been a loss of a sense of meaning in education. I've got two issues with what's being said or areas I'd like to clarify. And I think this is maybe something to go to the floor with and then we'll bring people back in. My personal feeling is bad arguments for technology, bad uses of technology don't make bad technology. So I think it's really important to separate out those two things. And I'm also very keen, because Newman's been mentioned, what do we mean by university? And I think maybe if we're certain about those things, then maybe we can put some perspective on whether MOOCs are a threat, an opportunity, or a tool. So who would like to comment or ask a question?
I mean, the question is really, what could we achieve if we really got behind MOOCs? And there was an absolutely terrifying article in Nature last week, recasting the danger of climate change. And so there's a small risk things begin to seriously collapse in 30 years, and a smaller risk that it start within 8 years. So it sounds like there's a need to produce many more engineers. I mean, with our modest objectives, we need twice as many as we do have. Not much time. It's a generation to make a difference. And it seems, I mean, particularly from what Diana said, there's a missing piece in all this, that one understands there's lectures, and then there's the Clay Christian thing that we're just going to get the best lecturers ever, and then there's the place-based contact learning, but it doesn't seem beyond the wit of man that these could be delivered by different bits in different places. So if you're part of an alumnus of 1 million and all the contact time is in Latvia, I mean, all that seems doable, but it's given the urgency, if we really wanted to solve a problem, what could we get out of MOOCs?
Okay, excellent. At the back there?
Yes, some economists might actually have a relatively cynical view of university education, like saying that one is both signaling in terms of the piece of paper you get coming out of a university. And on the other side, particularly places like Oxford and Cambridge or Harvard in the US, that matches the socialization benefits you get to the network you establish while at university. How do MOOCs actually, well, how does the panel think MOOCs work within that environment? And secondly, in the US particularly, part of the reason why MOOCs came up was because of the cost base, the cost structure of traditional on-campus universities. And it was meant to be like technology is the answer. Now, it might not be. I mean, I think that goes to the question of what the university is. But do the panelists have any ideas, any thoughts about what that could be?
Okay, thank you. Was there a gentleman in front of you? Yeah.
Raise your hand.
You can put your hand up.
Okay. Well, actually not knowing much about the MOOCs, having taken or started, not finished, a few online courses, and I should say I'm one of the PhD I'm a doctor who likes to play with those things. I mean, it does still seem that there's an inspirational possibility there. I did like the analogy with public libraries, but it does seem the idea that you can, before these things were called MOOCs, when MIT started putting their courses online, and the idea that, somebody could get a crap computer in an Indian village and, it potentially access that is a remarkable thing. Now, maybe the thing we should be thinking about is what can we do with this? And it clearly is not a replacement for the university as we have it now, or even the idealised university that maybe we'd like to have back, or maybe we don't have anymore. But maybe we need to separate these two things out a little bit, because it could be that there are really remarkable things that we could do with these tools, and we maybe need to try and specify those a bit more, rather than just being very fearful about what they might mean for the universities as we have them in the future. And I think, as Dennis kind of was pointing out, or certainly implicit in what he's saying, I mean, it's not and implicit in much of the discussion, it's not, I mean, if the universities are in a crisis, it's certainly not one caused by MOOCs, right? It's, so that seems to be a very false opposition which is being put forward.
Okay, excellent. There's a gentleman over here.
Yeah, I mean, working for TES Connect, which actually does something similar to MOOCs for teachers around the world, sharing lesson plans. I mean, I'm actually quite optimistic, like the last speaker, about the potential of MOOCs as kind of like an extension of Harold Lawson's University of the Air, which fed into the Open University. I think there is a possibility there that people can access online learning in a way that's they wouldn't be able to otherwise in science courses. It's very striking to me that there's some recent stats in the Wall Street Journal which say that 77% of all people taking MOOCs have actually at least got one degree already. So this isn't, at the moment at least, any kind of replacements for the undergraduate degree experience. It's more people who are doing it because they have some time in the evenings and want to learn something. They have an intellectual curiosity, and if that can be encouraged, although I would defend also watching Breaking Bad, then I don't think that's a bad thing. But I was at a conference run by Education Investor earlier this week where there were some very big claims made for what they're calling MOOCs 2.0. We're already at the 2.0 stage now, where people are effectively saying what we're going to see in universities is what people are talking up in classrooms now, the equivalent of the flipped classroom, where people watch MOOCs at home and then go into the university and discuss and engage with the ideas in the MOOCs instead. And I just wanted to kind of raise that, because in some ways that is closer to a Socratic ideal of a university, where you're actually having an engagement, you're having a discussion around the topics, and yeah, you can read and watch the MOOCs at home instead. So I'm interested to hear what people's thoughts are on that. But of course it does run the risk that you do have a lot of celebrity kind of MOOC stars, I guess, who kind of a clique who will be watched the world over, and that may have serious impact upon lecturers at universities, and also the amount of funding that's put into research in universities as well. So questions I just want to raise.
Excellent. So I'm going to bring the panel back in. Please keep your questions. We've got plenty of time, but just some of the questions that have been raised so far. Don't feel that you need to come back on all of them, but people are asking people to be a bit more concrete about what can be achieved with MOOCs. There's certainly a high degree of hyperbole around, as there is with all new technologies, but what practically might be achieved with them. What could they contribute to the university? People have asked, well, is this simply nothing more than about reducing costs for education? Is it as cynical as that? This is just a cost-saving measure. A number of people suggest that there might be a series of false dichotomies being set up here between technology and education, and if MOOCs really are to blame. And the last one was asking, should we go to this with a bit more of a spirit of optimism and what is possible? I was very taken, we put it on the web with B.F. Skinner's essay, Teaching Machines, and I was expecting something dreadful before I read it, but I thought it was quite good in the sense that he was saying, if certain elements of education could be automated, that might allow teachers to concentrate on the distinctly human aspects of education. and the high value added. So is there something there to be explored? Anybody like to come back to the stage?
Yeah, okay. I think the general positive approach to MOOCs is very important because we've got this phenomenon which for the first time has focused ministers and senior teams' minds on the issue of learning technologies and what they might do. This is extremely important because they can do a lot for improving education. And any criticism of MOOCs does not mean a defence of universities as they are. I mean, we should not confuse those two because we can all see lots of ways in which universities should be improved. And it's not fear for the universities, it's fear for the students that might give us pause over what MOOCs can really achieve for us. It was not the University of the Air that succeeded. The Open University, when it succeeds as well as it's doing now, succeeded because it's got, 7,000 or 8,000 associate lecturers now all over the country supporting those hundreds of thousands of students now studying. That's still a 1 to 25 ratio, and that's still what you need in the way that we conceptualize higher education at the moment, being able to help people do that. And yes, the cost of university education is huge, and especially in the US, one can well see why those developments began there. But in all our universities, what we must stop doing is getting the students to be subsidizing the research, which is what the universities are doing. So, especially with the advent of MOOCs, campus students are now subsidizing the education of highly qualified professionals. That's what they're doing now. So we ride this wave in the hope that it will enable us to explore some new pedagogies, to get some investment for once into education, which would be a great thing to do. When you think of how much investment there's been, when I was on the Deering Committee 20 years ago now almost, the analysis of the proportion of expenditure on the business of an industry that was done showed that universities were worse than the glue industry, which spent about 0.1% of its income on investment in research and what it did. We do not do research and teaching. That is what we do. That's our product. So if this is an opportunity to increase that kind of investment, then great. And the kinds of things that we would look at, just to give a couple of examples of what these new pedagogies might be. Imagine something like the Vicarious Masterclass, where you've got a small group of representative students in with a tutor arguing philosophy or showing how a musical composition should be played, tutoring individually each student who then stands as a vicarious experience for, it could be thousands of students watching that. That could be the kind of thing that we develop and try to understand how to do. Distributed pyramid discussions where you get everybody thinking on their own and then talking in twos and then talking in fours and then combining and arguing and then voting on who's got the best answer to a question. You could roll that kind of thing out with a new kind of technology tool. That's what we need investment in, but that's pedagogy. That's not just technology, that's pedagogy. So let's see that, and then yes, it will do some of these great things for us.
Well, it's not a matter of being technophobic or anti or pro-technology. I think I quite like MOOCs, and I didn't mention Socrates because he was a 5th century technophobe. The point being, I would make the point that if you don't sort out what education is, then whatever you say about MOOCs is a lie, right? If you don't know what you're doing, and I don't think it's pedagogy, I think it's playfulness. It just seems to me, what's the point about Socrates is that you had an intense relationship with individuals. He thought education was personal. I use this point that you can't educate people. You can't educate people. Yeah, exactly. I like bullies. You can't educate people until you can see the white of their eyes. That was the point, right? And, he did people. He was called the stingray. That's true. But that sort of relationship takes time, and you can't do that. Somebody was very offended at a conference. She'd gone to, I think it was the interview, met her MOOC tutor. Well, she didn't meet her, he walked past her, didn't recognise her. I mean, there was no personal relationship. It's an intellectual relationship that's really, really important. I just don't see how you can do it. The hype is there. You'll do the MOOCs and you have these pyramid games, you do all these things. It doesn't happen now. The follow-up discussion does not. Right? The point of the best piece of research on this, by the way, is Academically Adrift. The Aaron and Roxker book in America, which shows that the only things that work in universities, the book, by the way, just as an aside, shows that critical thinking goes down after 2 years at university in America. Right? That's basically what happens. And the reason is people aren't reading books and they aren't writing. Right? They're the only 2 things that improve. All the other things, all these sort of games, don't work. That's the truth. Right? And if students aren't putting in the effort and aren't doing the reading and having the real academic tutorials, then they're not going to learn. And that seems to me the real problem. We get back to what you're doing in universities, which is this intense intellectual relationship with authorities.
Okay, very interesting. Jason?
Yeah, I'm beginning to worry that Dennis's classes are a bit like being verbally assaulted by Diogenes, but although he doesn't look like he lives in a barrel. I don't hate MOOCs, I hate the word. We really need to kill this ugly, ugly word. Someone mentioned the cost of education in the United States, which is insane. It's completely out of control, so it's no surprise that MOOCs first arose there. But I've been talking a lot recently to people about liberal arts colleges, which are also becoming increasingly important in the US, precisely because they offer teaching-focused third-level education that isn't subsidizing other people's research. Now, they're still expensive, certainly by European standards. I'm sure they cost tens of thousands of dollars. But I think that smaller and nimbler university institutions like that probably are something that we should be considering if we really want to take education seriously. I should stress that I'm specifically speaking here about the liberal arts and humanities. Someone mentioned that we need more engineers. Absolutely true. And there is an important division to be made, I think, between the humanities and other forms of subject that are now taught at universities. I've been teaching some undergraduates recently, and because of a lack of space, I ended up teaching some arts graduates in the medical school. And while I was staring at all the plastic skeletons and other sort of gory items hanging around the place, it struck me that as rigorous, and I'm sure it's more rigorous than anything I've done, as rigorous as a medical education is, it has nothing to do with what I do. So I'm not exactly sure why these giant institutions have accreted together, and I think it might be a good idea to start breaking them down into their constituent parts. I think that might be somewhere to start if we care about education.
Excellent. Okay, Matt?
So I've got a few points I'd like to pick up on. So I guess in terms of the who's doing MOOCs at the moment, that's something that's quite a concern to us as a Futurelearn that's born of the Open University, which is about trying to make education accessible for those people who haven't done it before. And I think the interesting thing about MOOCs is it's very much at the moment an early adopter audience, and I think that is part of the reason people doing MOOCs at the moment generally are people who have degrees already and so on. So I think that that's something that will change, and I think that's something that, in terms of trying to make it a very accessible and consumer-friendly experience, dare I say it, is something that we're quite keen to do. I think there's also something around the MOOCs 2.0 thing. I think probably what we have seen to date is MOOCs 1.0. A lot of the technology that's been deployed is being done in a kind of lots of existing things put together in a certain way, whereas we are trying to build something ourselves, and that's why we are starting from the ground up, which is informed by pedagogy, and that's where the expertise of the Open University we're trying to layer into it. At the moment, obviously, you start simple and you build up on that, but we'd like to bring together the kind of ideas of small group discussions and so on, so that you are talking to small groups of people, and the way that you construct those kind of learning experiences so that they are genuine learning experiences and they're not simply online lectures, because I don't think a MOOC should be an online lecture and just a discussion forum. I think that is undermining what a MOOC actually is. And then vicarious learning is quite an interesting one, I think, and that's something that we're very keen on as well, and about, even if you don't get involved in that social experience, being able to see that those social experiences happening between other people and the discussions that are going on, I think is where the real value is. And if you can find ways of guiding people through that and being able to see the really great contributions and so on, and for the tutors that are involved, being able to see that this is the question that everybody wants answered and being able to answer that as a group and those kind of things. And I think if you look at how ideas and sort of memes form through social networks like Twitter and so on, I think there's something really compelling about what does that do for learning. Like if you can kind of find the ways ideas flow around the network and groups of people create their own different cohorts that kind of overlap in different ways, I think there's a lot of power that could be done there and a lot that we are just at the beginning of the journey of.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that, Matt. As a happy, well-remunerated, fulfilled further education teacher, I do notice that academics seem very unhappy. My HE colleagues, fellow teachers. And I'm interested in this thing about MOOCs, and I wonder whether, and I'm very interested in what Des was saying about authority, and I'm wondering whether authority really gets to the core of the issue that we're discussing here, and whether the MOOC is a mirror into the soul of the frustrated academic. And is this what is being played out here? There's a lady just over there who's been waiting a while. Blonde hair.
Yeah, you at the end of the last round, Toby, you posed the question, what is a university? And I think a kind of parallel question to go alongside that is, what is higher in higher education? And for me, what the higher bit means is that students are able to move on quite rapidly from having mastered a body of knowledge to being able to critique it, engage with it, interpret it, make it their own. And I think one problem in universities nowadays is that students are encouraged to kind of miss out the mastering the body of knowledge stage and jump straight, certainly in social sciences and humanities, they're expected to jump straight to the critique, interpret, make your own stage without ever having mastered that body of knowledge in the first place. And I think there's not just a misunderstanding of what knowledge is, that the panel have very accurately alluded to, a conflation of knowledge with skills and a conflation of knowledge with training. But I think more to the point, there is an inability to defend knowledge. Any attempt to assert knowledge is presumed to be elitist, symbolic violence, pedagogic violence, that you're going to assert something over somebody else, that you're going to claim something is more important than something else. Immediately the question gets asked, well, whose knowledge are you on about? Who are you to decide what knowledge is more important? And I think MOOCs could potentially be quite a useful tool then in being able to assert what a body of knowledge is. But unfortunately, in the absence of any proper understanding of what knowledge is, they will never ever go anywhere. I think the flipped classroom idea, which is a really big buzzword in higher education at the moment, is a very seductive idea. But the problem is, if there's no sense of what knowledge students are going to gain from the flipped bit, then when it comes to the discussion bit, it will again just resort to the critique and the engagement in the absence of any proper mastering of a body of knowledge in the first place.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Just immediately before you, in front of you, sorry.
Just slightly following on from the lady behind me, there does seem to be a deeper debate in this discussion about what the meaning of higher education is to be, and the problems that the university has had in defining what it is, and it very much predates the internet and technology, and there's been this problem for a long time, where I think it's a problem that because universities have become so obsessed with the idea of accessibility at all costs and as many people going as possible, you inevitably end up with this problem of knowledge, and the fact that ultimately I don't think most people are academic, and ultimately the university does become more instrumental place where people see it in terms of jobs. And given that this has been the policy for so many decades now, that it's all about accessibility, it's all got to be very democratic. And things like MOOCs and online courses are the logical extension of that. And if that's how you see education, well, then that's surely the logical step. If, however, you take the view that university should be an online a community of scholars, well, of course, that suggests really only a minority of people going. You can't have it both ways. You can't have academics defending the idea of a university, at the same time obsessing about having more people going. It's difficult to have it both ways.
Okay, excellent. To your right? Oh, sorry, your left. I am an FE teacher.
Mr. Walton, I hope you can detect from the grit in my voice that a screen just doesn't do it for education. You wouldn't get my aggressive tone if you didn't have the Socratic, eyeball to eyeball thing. But that's, by the way, actually I think you're a pussycat. But I think you made two very interesting remarks. One of them was that narrative is important for your MOOCs. Because MOOCs have a beginning, middle and an end, although from the dropout rate it looked like just an end. But, you should have a read of a book review I did on a book about storytelling on Spike. And the French author said that storytelling was a route to spirituality, a strategy for grant seekers, a mode of conflict resolution, and a weight loss plan. And I think that brings up what was being said here, which is that MOOCs are around there to legitimate a system that is felt to be illegitimate, because knowledge is not legitimate anymore, but a little bouncing screen is regarded as okay down with the youth and all of that. down there with the kids. And I think it's interesting also that the Harvard Business Review in 2005 ran a major article saying that, you know, when you're facing unsettling transition, telling a compelling story to co-workers was a great way to inspire belief in the storyteller's motives, character, and capacity to reach goals. So I think the MOOCs thing is, you know, I'm all in favour of technology, but I think the current context makes it touchy, feely, legitimating, and absolutely nothing to do with education and knowledge. I'm afraid to be so pessimistic. And may I also add that, you know, the other thing you added, Matt, was that, you know, there was a chance, I believe, to, you know, to make it a more pleasurable experience, I think. And generally in Salman Khan, the guy who's talking about flipping the classroom, I quite agree with the remarks that made before, that it sounds attractive that you go home to your little student bedroom and do all that screen stuff, and then you get, you know, Socratic in the classroom, not wasting time by listening to the lecturer, but by debating with each other. But what's so interesting about Salman Khan is he says, if you get all the data for the teachers, from the teachers, for the teachers, about how the kids are performing, you can then gamify that. You can then turn it into a game, and all of these things. And I think that, for me, speaks of infantilization of higher education. You know, when you mention the phrase, it's a journey, I'm thinking Tony Blair, The Journey, you know, and the need for a narrative for things. It's all patting kids on the head, gamifying them, infantilizing them, making it as easy as clicking on a screen. And I don't buy that. I'm sorry. I love computers, and I think there is potential in it. But until we change the atmosphere, it's going to be dumbed down and becoming more like a playground.
Okay, I'm going to bring the panel back in now. Just to sort of summarise, we've got people asking what is about higher education. Do we have to make a choice between a dangerously democratised education and an elitist community of scholars? Is the burgeoning of MOOCs about a legitimation of a no-knowledge university and a gamification of education? I just want to suggest that the world is never as we want it to be, and we can always suggest positive alternatives. So could we not have pro-knowledge MOOCs? I don't know if the panel wants to come back on any of that.
Well, you could have pro-knowledge MOOCs, but if people believe in knowledge, that's the... I mean, I like James, I'm keen on technology, I've got every toy going. But, you know, you get the situation where the idea of a university is where you pursue knowledge without fear or favour. Right? That's basically a university. It's not just passing on old knowledge, but students have to have that before they can get new knowledge. But that, in a sense, has been lost. The university vice-chancellor will say all universities are different, they're like dolly mixtures. You know, there are all sorts of different ones, they all have different character. So you have lost that idea of what a university is. And it is, I was amazed that this term pedagogy suddenly came back into fashion. And it's the techno people who are doing it and trying to say, that, I mean, it's down as these different interesting pedagogies. But then we can see what would actually happen in reality. This is even, you know, more glum-gloss stuff about what would happen. Is some underpaid facilitator will be organising those classes, which is already happening in a lot of situations. That you see the MOOCs. I heard one very distinguished pro-vice-chancellor say, I'm not going to name him, might sue, that you could get rid of all these duff lecturers and just have podcasts from Harvard. There is a real reality, that's why they're partly enthusiastic about this, and there are departments that are under threat. They do really good work, and talking to somebody this morning, we worked out that even if you had MOOCs in the present situation with the Harvard stars, what happened after about 5 years? Everything would just dry up. And it is the case. I mean, I'm much more optimistic, by the way. I don't like the term community of scholars. That describes what you do. But I think it can be wide. I'm always optimistic about ordinary people. I think if they meet a tutor who does have some knowledge and is willing to impart it in the traditional ways, right, then they can all learn. If you can remember, the Workers' Educational Association and lots of other bodies took people with virtually no education, and they were reading classics very, very quickly. Right? Now that we're doing pyramid games.
Yeah, I'm just going to go off on a very slight tangent, but that'll provide a useful education to you all about discrimination and privilege, and I'm up here and you're down there, so you're just going to have to suck it up. Someone mentioned, I think it was this lady halfway down the room, about people skipping the acquisition of knowledge in universities, and I think that's a very interesting point. Again, I'm specifically talking about the humanities and social sciences. Now, I've been discussing this with several people quite intently, but if you want a good MOOC, I suggest going onto YouTube and watching Camille Paglia reel against the orthodoxy that is accreted in the arts and people's inability to actually understand context and canon and see the arts in a historical sweep, instead sort of using a kind of either French postmodernist or critical theory inspired vision of the arts. So I mean, the question of whether or not we could have knowledge-free MOOCs, I think we're already close to having knowledge-free universities.
Thanks, do you want to come into that?
Sorry, so,
No, okay.
I'd like to respond to the gentleman over there.
Okay, sure. Well, go ahead and respond.
Okay, so it was the storytelling point. So I think as humans we're natural storytellers. That's kind of how we interact with the world, and it's about inspiring people. I think learning, like if you inspire people, you want to carry them on, and I mean storytelling in a very broad sense, and I think it's not just online resources that you can access at any point. It's about a cohort of students moving through something together, which is interesting. The fact that it's an event and it's something where you turn up at a certain point and you can kind of discuss things, and at different points on the journey you develop that kind of those kind of knowledge things, and you learn something through that kind of over a period of time. I think is what is interesting about a MOOC experience, as opposed to just simply putting knowledge resources on the internet. And it is about that kind of guidance and creating that kind of journey through things. I think in terms of the gamification thing and what you can do with data, I think that is extremely powerful in terms of allowing students to be able to set goals, compare themselves to things, make the learning visible, which there's lots and lots of research to show how effective that can be for learning. Be able to reflect on things and their own experiences, and if you can measure that in data that you can then show back to the students, but then you can also use that data to show the educators those kind of things. I think that can be extremely powerful in terms of like how people can improve the courses and improve the learning for the next time that particular course might run. So yeah, I think it's about inspiring people and motivating them. And Mike Sharples, who's our lead academic, when he talks about pedagogy, one of the words that he often does refer to is that enjoyable word, and that if people don't enjoy it, then actually learning can be quite a painful experience.
Diana.
Oh, there's so many things to respond to here. Just to respond quickly to the notion of the mastering the knowledge first. Knowledge is so important because that's how we build knowledge, that's how we progress it. So we've got to enable our students to know what there is already. That's fundamental to what universities and formal education is. It's not just anything goes. And there has been this terrible association of the idea of social constructivist approaches to knowledge, meaning that anything goes. You can kind of think what you like, you just discuss among yourselves and you can come up with something, and knowledge is some kind of emergent property of any discussion. It's not. What is important about education is that there are particular kinds of ways of thinking about things which will help you, and there are other ways which won't. And there is an authority in that, and there is a sense of mastery of a particular area of knowledge, and students have to be helped with that, in order that they can then go their own way with it, because that's what allows them to own it and take it further. So the question then is, can the technology help you do that? Well, I was a bit horrified by Dennis suggesting that students don't read and they don't write. I'm running an online master's course which has more than 30 students on it who are writing a fantastic amount, because I set them readings and then they have to debate and they talk among themselves and they pose questions, and we have a formal debate process where there's a proposer and a seconder and so on. And there's an enormous amount to read. Now what that means is that it's transformed from the classroom case where we have a 3-hour session with students. It's a timed, resource-limited period of time when they can say one after the other serially a few things, which means that the amount of actual production of language that they do of an academic kind is far less than what they're doing online, because that's unlimited, it's asynchronous. So it's very hard to manage. That's why you need all those lowly paid tutors supporting it. That's absolutely what MOOCs are doing. The TAs of this world are burgeoning as a result. It's not the professors replying to 100,000 students, I promise you. So MOOCs are going in that direction, which are forcing us to say, so how are we going to nurture those ideas? So if we come back to the issue of everything we need to know, we need all those engineers, we need all those people understanding climate change, etc., etc. Those are the big things that we have to face up to. Couldn't we see MOOCs as being the professional development solution? So that is, after all, the pedagogy that they espouse. It's, here's the latest thing, now talk among yourselves. That's pretty much what we do in professional development, because those professionals are very adept learners, and they help each other a lot. They have a lot of experience, they share it, they get a lot out of each other. Now, instead of, therefore, trying to aim for MOOCs for those 100 million, if we aim for MOOCs for those 4 million tutors that we now need, and maybe divide that by another 25 and create the people who are going to create the tutors, then we're beginning to get to a more manageable amount, and we begin to see that we are fostering the further education of people who are already reasonably experienced learners. Maybe that's a way of thinking about it, but we've got to keep in mind those big ambitions of what education's got to achieve. Bear in mind the tremendous potential of the technology, which can be asked, so how do we do this? It's good at solving difficult questions, but let's not run away with these terrible myths that this is just the way they are going to solve the problems of the world. They won't. Let's not run away with the terrible myth that this can be done on the back of academics doing it in their spare time without any kind of investment. That's not possible.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. So we've got time for a last round of questions, points. So could you put your hand up to make a point? That gentleman there.
Well, I'm actually less worried about MOOCs than I am about the chair giving me FE-style sound bites of all the panelists' contributions and the questions from the floor. And I feel very sad for Dennis that he was born in the wrong millennium. He may have noticed Socrates didn't award MAs and PhDs to the people he interrogated. And I suspect Dennis himself will recognise that much, if not most, of what he's learned through his life wasn't necessarily in a university context, and he didn't necessarily receive an award for it. And therefore, my question really is, are we not fetishising the credentials, MAs, PhDs, which everybody now seems obsessed that they need to have? I understand partly that there's a bit of a power struggle, you need an MA to work in various places. That's very sad, we need to roll that back. People also do it in order to advertise themselves. They need an MA to affirm who they are. It's also rather sad that they can't affirm who they are. But without that, I can't see MOOCs either being positive or negative in relation to that. Very final thing, I would start any lecture I give with a contemporary hook. Surely once you've recorded your MOOCs, they're out of date instantly, because you can't give this week's example of what my lecture theme is, because they're immediately out of date.
Okay. Gentleman at the front.
I'm an undergraduate, and I'm paying 9,000 a year to get inspired and motivated by the languages I'm studying. I'm not paying 9,000 a year to see a slide of learning objectives. It sounds facetious, but and I'm not quite sure where I stand on the MOOCs issue, but what is there to stop me, on my computer looking at a MOOC, just forward-winding through the learning objectives and getting to the languages I want to study, getting to the fascinating material I want to read. So surely, from that perspective, perhaps a MOOC would engender this thirst for knowledge, which some of you have been suggesting might be lacking in the current university system.
Okay, thank you for that. There was a couple of questions further down.
Well, just to go back to this theme of how do we understand what university is and what it does.
I just wanted to raise the issue of research, because a couple of people on the panel have referred to it in ways that I find a bit disturbing. And the idea that students are to be sort of pitied because they're subsidising somebody else's research, that this is a bad thing, that they should do that, or the idea that we should encourage the growth of liberal arts style education which focuses on teaching and not worry too much about research. To my mind, part of what a university is that it's not just about teaching, it's also about research, and it's the combination of those two, and the fact that you encounter in university tutors people who are engaged with trying to find new knowledge, generate new knowledge in their subject area, including, I think, in the arts and the social sciences. In terms of MOOCs, I think that I agree with those people who have suggested that the way, there's nothing kind of good or bad about a MOOC. It's just the question is, how do we look at them? And the way that our kind of contemporary context encourages us to look at them is as kind of teaching-only vehicles, much in the way that university education in general is now understood, is that you can separate out the research goes on in one place, and then the kind of mass teaching-only institutions. Well, why not do that with a MOOC? The problem is in how the process is understood, rather than in the particular technology that one uses to realise it.
Excellent, thanks for that. There was one more question behind you, and that will be the last one.
Yeah, I was going to make that point, so I won't make that point. But there are a few things really. Well, one is this point about the education and the credential. The two things are completely different things. Education, to echo what Jason and Dennis said, is completely uninstrumental, as is Blue Sky's research. And one of the things that I've been thinking through this whole thing, the lectures are all very fine, but actually you never needed to attend lectures. Now they take registers in universities for lectures, but actually it's not important whether you turn up to lectures at all. Giving a lecture was always a compromise. It was a compromise based on student numbers expanding beyond being able to have seminars. So, historically, that's all a bit of a joke anyway. But what you got from an education, especially in one of the research-led good universities, wasn't just learning about your subject. I studied maths, but what I came out of when I finished my degree was a really broad knowledge of lots of stuff because of the people I came into contact with and the fantastic arguments that I had. It's really striking to me. I've been doing some teaching for Newcastle University, and it's laughingly, it's called innovative teaching. We had an innovative teaching grant. I was teaching third-year geographers to debate, and they'd never had an argument, and they're in their third year of a geography degree. To me, that's really striking, and that really shows how degraded the current university system is. We've moved very far away from any idea of generating knowledge and of the link between research and teaching that was so intimate and important.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to bring back our speakers in reverse order. I've just got a couple of announcements. First is there's a drinks reception now in the Guild Hall. Please collect any items from the cloakroom because it's about to close after this session. And I'd like to thank gratefully our sponsors, the Times Higher Educational Supplement and the Open University, who've sponsored this event. So in reverse order, Dennis.
As to whether I'm living in the wrong millennium, it's not true. I think my advice to that question about topicality is always start with Socrates, because it doesn't become outdated very quickly. But I just think, I did once think about having no qualifications at university. You just leave a university with whatever you've got, a piece of work, an essay. And in fact, that's what people do judge you on. If you've got, because of grade inflation, I think Warwick boasts that having like a third of its graduates have got first and the rest have got 2-1s. How would you judge who is a good student or somebody you want to employ? You look at their work, or you talk to them at length. So there is a way around that. But interesting things are happening. I was just thinking about the way forward is probably going back. I wrote an article, I think some time ago, it was reported in the Times Higher about the need for classical education, and I got contacted by an organisation of a few individuals set up something called Benedictus. And it's a medieval model of a university with a classical education that's going to open its doors next year, with courses in Florence and Rome and London. You know, and you want to see it, I think I'll go on it.
Okay, excellent.
So the value of the university is that universal education you get across a broad range of discipline areas. I think that's so important, and that's why we want to try and preserve that sort of place-based people coming together, warm bodies interacting, and that's a very important part of it. We want to try and make that possible for as many people as possible. So it may not be 3 years full-time for everybody, it might be a taste of it sometimes. The Open University had week-long summer schools. That was a terribly important part of the Open University experience, was to get together with other students. So that has got to be in the mix of whatever we're offering for the university in the future. Research, yes, that's a part of it too. You want to be taught by people who are at the cutting edge of their subject, and that feeds back into the teaching. The teaching actually, ironically, also feeds into the research. That's wonderful, but universities have to have a much better understanding of the cost of what it takes to teach, and we don't have that. We have never modelled even traditional teaching costs. So we don't know what it means to now change to this new kind of teaching where it's all online and it takes much more time. So we've got to understand that relationship and have the kind of business models for universities, and they do need it because it's large amounts of money and they've got to get return on investment and so on. So we've got to make sure that we're not getting the students to subsidize the research. The reason that happens is that universities get more money by doing good research than they do by doing good teaching. They get the students anyway, they get the money for the students anyway. How well they teach the students is not a factor in how much money they get. So inevitably, it's the research that drives so much. So without that terrible thing called the REC, we'd be doing much better. And if universities don't sharpen up and understand that incredibly important resource of the teacher, then we will not develop the ideal university of the future that could be possible with these new technologies.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah. On the question of research, I mean, I'm not against it. It would be hypocritical of me. I'm doing a PhD. But what I'm saying is that I think there's a reason the liberal arts colleges are growing in the US, and I think it's to do with large, unwieldy, bureaucratic, oversized universities with cookie-cutter teaching. I think that really is a problem. I also think it's a problem, I don't know about the UK, I don't live here, but it's certainly a problem in Ireland. Very briefly on the point of credentials, that's a problem, and you increasingly need a Bachelor of Arts or something similar to get an entry-level clerical job, but I mean, I don't know what can be done about that. I don't think universities themselves are necessarily to blame for that so much as educational policy.
Excellent. Matt?
I guess, I mean, I think we're thinking about a world where it's not either or, it's a mixed economy of these things. And what you always see with new technology is that existing technology finds its place alongside new technology. So for instance, radio was a primary medium, it's now a secondary medium, and it's found its place. Cinemas are now a place where they are beginning to become much more kind of social places to gather and so on, and they're pushing some of those kind of qualities in what they do. And I think some of those things might be applicable to kind of universities, in that a lot of our partners are interested in what we're doing because they're learning from what these new tools can bring, and where some of them can bring some efficiencies, some of them can also provide actually better ways of learning and more interesting ways of doing certain things that older methods may not. But I think it will also mean that universities will focus on some of those human elements and the kind of more high-touch support and so on. I think that's something that we also would like to look at as well in terms of what we do is the Open University associate lecturers that we mentioned earlier, like those kind of models where if we can provide the basic element for free, where you bring a large number of people together, and then in order to make that a sustainable thing, you can convert a number of those students to things like paying for some more high-touch support or paying for the kind of proof that was also kind of mentioned, and that's a way of making the whole thing more sustainable. Then that's kind of quite interesting. I also think that probably it is just the beginning, and we're just working out this kind of thing. And I think there's going to be a lot of exploration, and what we see as the current sort of generation is just the sort of first steps on that journey. So it's going to be interesting, I think.
Excellent. I'd like to thank you for your contributions and points today, but could we also thank our panel?